President Donald Trump has set the lowest refugee ceiling in U.S. history, just 7,500 for the next fiscal year. But what's sparking global outrage is who he's choosing to prioritize: white South Africans from the Afrikaner minority.
Trump never expected he would be outplayed and schooled by the very nation he was trying to portray badly. He announced a major overhaul in America's refugee policy, placing a record low cap but giving preference to white South African refugees. This sent a message that white South Africans were in desperate need of help because, according to him, they were reportedly being persecuted. Earlier, both Trump and Elon Musk tried spreading misinformation that South Africa was targeting and persecuting its white population in a propaganda effort to bend the country on key issues such as land reform and foreign alignment. But Trump miscalculated because he was schooled back then, and he is being schooled again now, humiliated by the very nation he sought to lecture. So, what really happened, and how did South Africa respond? In this video, let's find out. The controversy began when Trump's administration announced the lowest refugee quota in U.S. history. The number of refugees allowed into the country dropped from 125,000 to only 7,500, and most of those places were reserved for white Afrikaners from South Africa. The justification came in polished political language about humanitarian concern and national interest, but the real message was racial. It implied that white South Africans were victims of racial persecution under a black-led government, an idea that has circulated in far-right circles for years. Trump's decision built upon an earlier narrative that he and Musk helped amplify on social media. They claimed that South Africa's land reform policies and high crime rates were evidence of a wide-scale persecution against white farmers. The claim was false, but it served a purpose. It painted South Africa as unstable and racially vindictive, creating moral cover for Western criticism of its leadership under Cyril Ramaphosa, who is aligned more openly with BRICS nations. What Trump did not anticipate was that this narrative would collapse under its own weight. Fact-checking organizations and South African authorities quickly exposed the claims as baseless. Data from the South African Police Service showed that farm attacks, while tragic, were rare compared to the country's broader violent crime problem and affected people of all races. The supposed white persecution was a Western myth that refused to die, but now it was being carried by the most powerful office in the world, and that made Pretoria respond harder than ever. Within hours of the U.S. announcement, the South African government issued a statement condemning the policy as racially discriminatory and factually dishonest. Officials pointed out that many prominent Afrikaners themselves had rejected the idea of being persecuted, and several had called the refugee offer insulting. Pretoria reminded the world that South Africa's post-apartheid democracy was founded on equality, and that crimes in the country were driven by socio-economic inequality, not racial revenge. The Foreign Ministry accused Washington of weaponizing misinformation to interfere in domestic politics. They said the U.S. policy was built on propaganda that wanted to portray black-led nations as incapable of governing fairly. In the words of one senior official, this is not about refugees. It is about narrative control. It is about who gets to tell the story of South Africa. The government's reaction reflected a new confidence. Unlike in earlier decades, when African nations often softened their tone to preserve diplomatic ties, South Africa's stance was direct and unapologetic. It did not seek validation from Washington. Instead, it spoke as an equal, defending its sovereignty with data and calm logic rather than outrage. But why did Trump try selling this lie? Well, behind the refugee decision lies a broader political calculation. Trump's America has built a narrative of protecting white victimhood, both domestically and internationally. By presenting white South Africans as victims of a failing black government, the administration reinforces a familiar political message for its own base that Western civilization is under attack from the global South and must defend itself. This policy also serves as a symbolic rejection of multiracial democracy abroad. By elevating white Afrikaners to refugee status, while excluding millions of non-white refugees from places like Sudan, Gaza, and Afghanistan. Washington is redefining humanitarianism through race. It signals that compassion can be racialized and that moral legitimacy can be bought through selective empathy. For South Africa, this move is not simply offensive, it is strategically dangerous. It risks reigniting old racial divisions that the country has spent decades healing. It also undermines South Africa's land reform efforts, which are meant to correct historic injustices from the apartheid era without violating constitutional rights. By framing those reforms as racial persecution, the U.S. turns a domestic development policy into a global propaganda weapon. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Interestingly, the claim of a white persecution in South Africa is one of the most persistent modern myths in Western discourse. It originated on far-right websites in the early 2000s and has been repeatedly debunked by international researchers. Yet it survives because it fits convenient ideological propaganda. It allows Western conservatives to portray themselves as defenders of civilization under siege. It converts South Africa's complex social challenges into a simple racial morality tale that flatters Western guilt and fear. Trump's adoption of this myth gives it institutional backing. When the President of the United States repeats falsehoods, they become diplomatic problems rather than fringe theories. It also reveals how deeply racial politics still shape Western foreign policy. Even in 2025, the idea that a white minority in Africa deserves special rescue carries more emotional weight in Washington than the suffering of millions of displaced people across the developing world. South Africa's government understands this dynamic perfectly. Its response is not only defensive, but educational. It exposes how Western politics often project their own racial anxieties onto African soil. Pretoria's statement that the limited number of white South Africans applying for refugee status proves there is no persecution was a polite way of saying, this crisis exists only in your imagination. What makes this moment striking is that South Africa is no longer reacting as a subordinate state in the global order. It is confronting one of the world's most powerful governments without fear. Its confidence comes from both moral authority and geopolitical leverage. As a leading member of BRICS and a central voice in African diplomacy, South Africa represents a new generation of nations that can challenge Western narratives on equal footing. This is why Trump's miscalculation is so significant. He assumed South Africa would either remain silent or seek to mend relations quietly. Instead, Pretoria used the moment to strengthen its image as a voice of African dignity. By rejecting the refugee narrative, it reminded the world that Africa's problems do not need Western interpretations or Western saviors. The exchange also highlights the new diplomatic language emerging across the continent. It is no longer defensive or apologetic. It is assertive, factual, and self-defined. When South Africa says there is no white persecution, it is not seeking Western approval. It is reclaiming its right to define its own reality. And now, Trump's refugee program is laying bare Western hypocrisy. The refugee policy exposes the double standard that has long shaped Western humanitarianism. The same government that restricts entry to war victims from the Middle East now opens its gates to people who come from one of Africa's most privileged communities. Afrikaners, who make up about 7% of South Africa's population, still control 72% of farm and agricultural holdings and enjoy living standards far higher than the continental average. By prioritizing them, the United States reveals a bias that dates back to colonial history, a belief that white lives in Africa are inherently more valuable, more relatable, and more deserving of rescue. The language of protecting persecuted minorities becomes a shield for preserving racial hierarchy. This hypocrisy is not lost on African observers. Many intellectuals and policymakers have pointed out that when Africans flee conflict or poverty, they are met with suspicion. But when Europeans or white settlers claim danger, they are met with sympathy. The refugee program becomes a mirror reflecting the racial order of global politics. South Africa's defiance tears away that mirror and forces the West to look at its own reflection. Now, the broader lesson goes beyond South Africa. Across Africa, leaders are watching this episode as proof that the West still struggles to see Africans as equals. By prioritizing white refugees, the United States has unintentionally reminded the continent why it needs to build its own systems of solidarity and self-reliance. From Nigeria to Kenya, analysts are already discussing the implications. If South Africa can publicly challenge Washington and face no penalty, it sets a precedent for other nations to do the same. The age of quiet compliance is ending. The new era is one of diplomatic confidence rooted in economic independence and moral clarity. Africa is no longer asking for Western approval. It is asking for respect. And when that respect is denied, it responds with exposure, exposing the lies, the hypocrisy, and the selective compassion that have defined Western engagement for decades. Do you think Trump truly believes white South Africans are persecuted, or is he using them for politics? Why did Trump ignore real refugees from Sudan, Gaza, and Afghanistan, but rush to save wealthy Afrikaners? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on how the U.S. can claim to defend democracy while favoring descendants of apartheid. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.